The back alley was dimly lit, with the distant sound of traffic muffled by towering brick walls. Malik, a black man in his late 20s, had just finished his shift at the diner and was taking a shortcut home. His mind was preoccupied with thoughts of bills and his upcoming job interview, but a sharp laugh snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned to see a group of young men approaching, their faces twisted with sneers. "Hey, look who it is," one of them jeered. "What are you doing around here, huh?" Before Malik could respond, the group surrounded him, their taunts growing louder and more hateful. "Trash belongs in the trash," one of them said with a smirk. Before Malik could react, they shoved him backward, tipping him into a large dumpster. Laughter echoed in the alley as they walked away, leaving Malik humiliated and trapped. But what they didn't realize was that this night would set off a chain of events that would not only teach them a lesson but also showcase the resilience of a man determined to rise above their hatred. Malik sat in the dumpster, his heart pounding and the stench of rotting garbage filling his nostrils. He could still hear the mocking laughter of the group as it faded into the distance. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to push aside the humiliation and focus on climbing out. The slick edges of the dumpster made it difficult, but after several attempts, he managed to haul himself over the edge. His clothes were filthy, his hands scraped, but it wasn't the physical discomfort that hurt the most, it was the hate-filled words that echoed in his mind. As he wiped his hands on his pants, Malik's resolve hardened. He had spent his whole life facing prejudice, but this act of cruelty was a reminder that hatred wasn't going to stop him. Shaken but determined, Malik began walking home. Along the way, a kind elderly woman who owned the corner store noticed his disheveled appearance. "Are you all right, son?" she asked, her concern genuine. Malik hesitated but nodded. "I'll be fine," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She handed him a towel from the store's back room. "Sometimes people's ugliness is a reflection of their own brokenness," she said. "Don't let it touch your spirit." Malik thanked her, her words resonating deeply as he made his way home. The next morning, Malik woke up feeling bruised, not just physically, but mentally. The sting of humiliation still hung over him, like an invisible weight that pressed down on his chest. But as he took a hot shower and dressed for the day, something within him shifted. He wasn't going to let their cruelty define him, not today, not ever again. He met up with his close friend, Darnell, at the corner cafe. Darnell, a former Marine, had always been someone Malik turned to for advice. He was tough, pragmatic, and always ready to stand up for what was right. "What happened last night?" Darnell asked, his eyes narrowing as Malik recounted the events in the alley. Malik's voice trembled as he told the story, but there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Darnell's face hardened with anger. "Those punks think they can just treat people like that because they feel safe in a crowd. We're gonna make sure they see the consequences of their actions." Malik hesitated. "I don't want to make things worse, Darnell. You know how these things go. It'll just get twisted." Darnell leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "This isn't about revenge. This is about standing up, Malik. About showing them and everyone else that people like us are not easy targets. We have to show the world we won't be pushed around." Malik felt the weight of his words. The anger that had been simmering deep inside him began to rise to the surface. He realized that Darnell was right. They couldn't just sit back and let the hate go unchallenged. "I'm with you," Malik said finally, determination settling over him like a shield. "What do we do next?" Darnell smiled. "We'll make sure that they regret ever laying a hand on you." The plan was simple, but powerful. They would gather a small group of friends and allies who shared Malik's desire for justice. Together, they would confront the bullies in a way that would make their actions impossible to ignore. Darnell started calling people he knew, local activists, musicians, and a few others who had witnessed or experienced racial injustice in their own lives. Within hours, Malik's network had grown, and the plan took shape. The confrontation would take place in a public park, where they knew the bullies would likely show up to hang out. It would be a chance to not only face them, but to have the community watch as they stood up for what was right. The hours leading up to the confrontation were a whirlwind of preparation. Darnell helped Malik get his words right, coaching him on how to stay calm, stay strong, and not let the anger that bubbled inside him get the best of him. Malik was nervous, but as he rehearsed his speech, he realized he had the strength to do this. He wasn't going to let the hate they had shown him be the final word. When the day arrived, Malik and his group gathered in the park. They didn't want to escalate things, no violence, no screaming, but they were prepared to make their point clear. The air was heavy with anticipation, and Malik's heart thudded in his chest as he waited. When the bullies arrived, laughing and shoving each other around, the tension in the air thickened. It didn't take long for them to spot Malik, Darnell, and the others. One of the bullies, a tall, aggressive-looking guy with a sneer plastered across his face, made a beeline toward Malik. "What's this, huh? You think you can just show up and make us feel bad for what happened?" Malik stood tall, his back straight, his hands clenched at his sides. "No," he said firmly, looking the man directly in the eyes. "This is about making sure you understand that what you did wasn't just some joke. You tried to humiliate me, to treat me like I wasn't worth anything. Well, guess what? I am worth something. And you'll never forget what you did." The bully's face twisted with frustration. "You think you're better than us?" he spat. "I don't think I'm better than you," Malik replied, his voice unwavering. "I know I am. And you know what? So do you?" Darnell stepped forward, his presence commanding, ready to support Malik no matter what. "You're not going to get away with this. Not anymore." The group surrounding Malik and the bullies watched in silence, their faces ranging from curiosity to sympathy. The atmosphere shifted, and for the first time, the bullies began to realize they weren't dealing with someone they could easily intimidate. This wasn't a fight of fists or violence, it was a fight for respect. "What's this gonna prove?" the bully with the sneer muttered. "It's gonna prove that hate has consequences," Malik replied, his voice cutting through the tension. "And you'll remember this day for the rest of your lives." At that moment, the power dynamics in the park shifted. What began as a moment of cruelty turned into a public lesson in respect. The bullies were no longer the ones in control, they had been put on notice. And Malik knew, without a doubt, that they would never try to push someone down the way they had pushed him again. The sun hung high over the park as Malik and Darnell walked onto the open field where they knew the bullies liked to gather. The sounds of laughter and shouting reached their ears before they saw the group, 6 young men sitting on benches, tossing a football around carelessly, their voices carrying a casual arrogance. Malik's heart pounded, but he kept his step steady, his resolve firm. Behind Malik and Darnell, a small group of their friends followed, their presence a quiet show of support. Some carried cameras to document the encounter, while others held signs with messages about justice and respect. As the group approached, conversations around the park quieted, more and more people turning their attention to the growing tension. One of the bullies, a tall man with a cocky grin and a baseball cap tilted backward, noticed Malik first. His grin faltered for a second before turning into a mocking smirk. Well, look who it is," he said loudly, standing up and tossing the football to a friend. The trash decided to take a walk. His friends laughed, but the chuckles were weaker than before, their confidence dimmed by the sight of the larger crowd gathering behind Malik. Malik stopped a few feet away, his hands at his sides, his face calm but unyielding. "We need to talk," he said firmly, his voice steady enough to cut through the noise of the park. The leader of the group, a bulky guy with tattoos snaking up his arms, crossed his arms and leaned back against the bench. "Oh yeah? What about?" he asked, feigning disinterest. "What you did to me last week," Malik said, taking another step forward. "You didn't just hurt me, you showed everyone who you really are. You thought you could treat me like nothing because of the color of my skin, and you thought it would end there. But I'm here to make sure it doesn't." The bullies exchanged glances, their smirks faltering as the weight of Malik's words hung in the air. The tall one with the baseball cap scoffed. "It was just a joke, man. You're blowing this way out of proportion. A joke? Malik repeated, his voice rising slightly. You think it's funny to shove someone into a dumpster? To humiliate them in front of the world? That's not a joke, it's hate, and you know it. Darnell stepped forward, his broad frame radiating quiet authority. He's not alone anymore, he said, his voice deep and calm. You tried to make him feel small, but look around. You're the ones who look small now. The bullies glanced at the growing crowd around them. People from the park had stopped to watch, their phones raised to record what was happening. Parents stood with their children, whispers of shock and anger rippling through the onlookers. You've made this a lot bigger than you thought, Darnell continued. And now, everyone here is going to see the truth about what kind of people you are. The leader of the bullies stood up, his face flushed with frustration. You think this makes you look good? Coming out here with your little fan club, he sneered. It's not about looking good, Malik replied sharply. It's about making sure people like you don't get to push us around anymore. I'm standing here because I refuse to let your hate define me or anyone else. The crowd murmured in agreement, some clapping softly as Malik's words resonated with them. A woman near the front of the group spoke up. You should be ashamed of yourselves, she said, pointing at the bullies. This isn't how you treat another human being. For the first time, the bullies began to look uncomfortable. The tall one with the baseball cap shoved his hands in his pockets, avoiding eye contact. The leader crossed his arms tightly, his jaw clenched. One of the younger bullies, a lanky teenager who had stayed quiet until now, finally spoke up. I didn't want to do it, he said, his voice shaking slightly. It wasn't my idea. Then why did you? Malik asked, turning his attention to him. The teenager looked down, his face reddening. I don't know. I didn't want to look weak. Malik stepped closer, his tone softening. Strength isn't about tearing people down. It's about lifting them up. You don't have to follow people like this to prove anything. The teenager nodded slowly, shame flickering across his face. By now, the entire park was focused on the confrontation. Malik took a deep breath, his voice steady and commanding. This isn't just about me. This is about all the people you've tried to make feel small, all the people you've hurt because you think you're better than them. You're not. And it's time you learned that. The leader of the bullies opened his mouth to retort, but found no words. The crowd's energy had shifted entirely, their judgment and disapproval bearing down on the group. For the first time, the bullies felt the weight of accountability pressing against them. As Malik turned and walked away, the crowd parted to let him through, clapping and cheering quietly in support. Darnell followed, his hand resting briefly on Malik's shoulder. You did it, he said. And they'll never forget it. The bullies stayed frozen in place, the jeers they once threw at others now silenced by the strength and dignity Malik had shown. The video of the confrontation spread quickly online, shared by onlookers who had recorded the powerful moment. Within days, it was the talk of the community. Local news outlets picked up the story, describing how Malik had stood his ground against hate and turned a humiliating experience into a lesson for everyone. The community's response was overwhelming. People reached out to Malik with messages of support, praising his courage and resilience. Activists organized rallies and events, using his story to highlight the ongoing fight against racial injustice. Malik found himself invited to speak at schools and community centers, his words inspiring others to stand up for what was right. Meanwhile, the bullies faced the consequences of their actions. Their names and faces were now widely known, and they found themselves ostracized by the very community they had once dominated. Jobs, friendships, and even family relationships were strained as people distanced themselves from the group's hateful behavior. One of the bullies, Chris, couldn't ignore the weight of what he'd done. Late one evening, he sent Malik a message asking to meet. Malik hesitated but agreed, curious about what Chris had to say. At the meeting, Chris's voice trembled as he apologized. I was stupid, Malik, he said, his eyes downcast. I let myself get swept up in it, and I didn't think about how much harm I was causing. I'm sorry. Malik studied him for a moment before replying. "I appreciate your apology," he said. "But words aren't enough. Change isn't about what you say, it's about what you do." Chris nodded, his face serious. "I'll prove it," he promised. True to his word, Chris began volunteering at local community events and joined one of the anti-hate initiatives sparked by Malik's story. He stood beside Malik at rallies and helped organize programs that focused on fostering understanding and inclusion. Over time, his actions spoke louder than his past mistakes, and while forgiveness wasn't immediate, it began to take root. For Malik, seeing someone from the group take responsibility was a step toward healing, not just for himself, but for the entire community. What had started as an act of cruelty in a dark alley had transformed into a catalyst for change, proving that even the ugliest moments could lead to something brighter. Over the next few months, Malik became a prominent voice in his community. He spoke at schools, churches, and community centers, sharing his story and encouraging others to challenge prejudice wherever they encountered it. The incident in the alley, once a source of humiliation, became a turning point, not just for Malik, but for everyone involved. Even the bullies, facing the consequences of their actions, began to reevaluate their behavior. Malik's strength and grace inspired countless others, proving that even in the face of cruelty, dignity and resilience could prevail. The alley where Malik had been thrown into the dumpster became a symbol of transformation. What began as an act of hate ended as a catalyst for change, uniting a community and showing that no one deserved to be treated as less than human. Malik's journey was a testament to the power of standing tall against injustice, no matter how deep the hurt or how strong the hate. And as he walked through his neighborhood, now greeted with respect and admiration, he knew that his story had only just begun.